right, people. There's three important topics that we need to cover at the end of World War One. One is the Russian Revolution, which we'll spend a short separate unit on. The second is the role of the United States, and that we'll spend some time on here in the next couple weeks. And then the third is the end of the war. So one thing is make sure you review your notes. We've gone through the first about 17 pages, and we're to the bottom of page 17. So we're through almost all of 1917. The last battle we had talked about was Passchendaele in the summer of 1917. And that takes us to the fall. This is after the French Mutiny. And just a couple things worth mentioning on this map. One, the Battle of Cambrai is significant to mention, if only, you can see it here, if only because it was the first successful use of tanks. And that does change things for the rest of the war, which only is going to last about a year. The Germans also recognized that they would have to act quickly because the Americans were entering the war, and the Russians had pulled out in the fall, so they could focus their attention on the Western Front with the knowledge that the U.S. was coming and they should act fast. So that leads to what the Germans called the peace offensive, and what other historians would refer to as the Ludendorff offensive, and that takes place in the spring of 1918, and you can see it here. And I'll just read you this text. Following the revolution, Russia signed a peace treaty with Germany, transferring 1 million men from east to west. With greater numbers of American troops arriving, the Germans, in a last bid to win the war, launch a massive offensive on the 21st of March. It fizzles out, as did several later attempts to effect a breakthrough, and it was really just a matter of time after July before the Allies counterattacked. So this German offensive was the first real action the Americans saw. They defended at Chateau Thierry and at Belleau Wood, which were roughly in the same place. I think some of you are doing your project on that. What happens in the summer, though, is the result of the Germans being completely exhausted and the Allies having the advantage of manpower. So watch the Allied offensive and watch the German line collapse. So let's watch it one more time. So in the summer, the Allies launched a major offensive, and this is all detailed again in your notes, and you should definitely refer to that. The Americans led the operation around Saint-Mihiel. Their job was to push through the Ardennes forests to the north in support of the Allies. They refused to fight integrated with the British and the French, and the feeling was probably mutual. There wasn't a lot of trust quite yet. But regardless, the final Allied offensive, in which the United States did play a role, is what led to the German line collapsing. And let me just read you this. August 8th was the Black Day of the German army. With unceasing attacks, the Allies drove the Germans back. In early October, the British broke through the Hindenburg Line, and increasing numbers of German soldiers surrendered and began to talk of peace. By the end of October, Germany admitted defeat and began looking for advantageous peace terms. By November, they had no choice but to accept the Allies' harsh surrender conditions. On the 11th of November, the armistice document was signed in a railway carriage at Compiègne, and the guns fell silent at 11 a.m. That was supposed to be a meaningful date, the 11th hour of the 11th month on the 11th day. One thing that it doesn't mention here is that it's important to note that the Germans surrendered, or I shouldn't say surrendered, agreed to stop fighting based upon Wilson's 14-point peace plan. What the Treaty of Versailles becomes several months later in the summer of 1919 is a completely different document. So there certainly were problems with the end. Also note that the Allies stopped before entering Germany. They could have continued all the way to Berlin, but in World War I chose not to do that.